Welcome back to ABA Chapter Chat.
Great to be back.
Today, we're diving deep into something that's really fundamental to what we do in applied behavior analysis. It's all about understanding why someone engages in a certain behavior. We all see the actions, but the real power, well, it lies in figuring out the function, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And as ABA professionals, you're often supporting individuals who present with behaviors that can be, well, challenging.
Right.
So it's just crucial to look beyond the surface, beyond what the behavior looks like, and ask, what's the purpose here? What is this person trying to achieve or communicate?
Exactly. And our guide for this exploration is a key chapter, Chapter 7, Determining the Function of Behavior, from the 10th edition of Applied Behavior Analysis for Teachers.
A really foundational text.
It really is.
Yeah.
Think of this deep dive as maybe a shortcut to really grasping these core ideas. Our mission today is pretty clear. Break down the key concepts of figuring out why behaviors happen, give you some practical, real-world examples, and hopefully offer some actionable takeaways you can use right away.
Yeah, things you can apply to better support the individuals you work with. And this chapter really hammers home a vital shift in thinking. Instead of just focusing on the form, what the behavior physically looks like, the topography we need to understand its function, the reason it's happening. That difference is everything when it comes to effective support.
Okay, let's get into it then. The chapter kicks off with a couple of, well, really relatable examples. First, there's Maurice. He's a middle schooler, kept getting into the fights.
Yeah.
The consequence, in-school suspension. Now, logically, you'd think suspension would stop the fighting, right?
I hope so.
But it didn't change a thing for Maurice. Then there's Angela in Mr. Gray's class. She was screaming a lot. The standard response was timeout. And interestingly, the screaming did stop during timeout. But then Angela started hitting, even headbanging.
Wow. So the original behavior stopped, but new ones emerged.
Exactly. It really seemed like the timeout, well, it wasn't getting to the root of the issue.
And what's so insightful about these cases is how the initial interventions focused only on the form, the fighting, the screaming. They used standard consequences.
Right.
But because the why, the function, wasn't understood, they just didn't work. And like you said with Angela, it sometimes even leads to other, maybe worse behaviors popping up.
Which brings us to such a critical point. The same exact behavior, like aggression, can serve totally different purposes for different people.
Totally.
For one kid, it might be about getting attention. For another, maybe it's about escaping a task they hate.
Precisely. And the flip side is also true. You can have behaviors that look completely different, say a child verbally asking for juice or pointing the juice carton or maybe even banging their cup, all serving the exact same function.
Right.
Getting that juice.
Right. Different forms, same function.
Exactly. So if we just try to stop a behavior without understanding what the person is trying to get or get away from, we're kind of missing the point. We're not teaching them a better, more appropriate way to meet that underlying need.
And that can lead to the behavior just coming back later, or like with Angela, new challenging behaviors might develop instead.
The chapter really stresses, we have to understand the purpose in that specific context for that specific individual.
So what are these common purposes? The chapter lays out 6 main functions of behavior. Let's walk through them.
Okay.
First one, to gain attention. Think social positive reinforcement.
Right.
The person does the behavior to get interaction. Could be from adults, could be from peers. A student calling out in class.
Classic example.
Or if that doesn't work, maybe they start tapping their pencil or even throwing things just to get anyone to notice them. The chapter even suggests Maurice's fighting might have initially stemmed from a lack of positive peer attention.
Yeah, so any attention, even negative attention from a fight, becomes reinforcing in that context. The maintaining consequence is getting that interaction.
Makes sense. Okay, function number 2, to gain a tangible.
This one's pretty straightforward. The behavior results in getting something concrete they want.
Like an object.
Or an activity.
Exactly. An object, an activity, a specific food, a privilege. The classic example is the child having a tantrum in the store near the toy aisle.
Ah, yes. We've all seen that.
Right. It's positive reinforcement again. They do the behavior, they get the item they want.
Got it. Third function.
To gain sensory stimulation. This is automatic positive reinforcement.
Automatic, meaning?
Meaning the behavior itself produces the reinforcement. The sensory experience is the reward. Things like humming, rocking, maybe hand flapping, repetitive finger movements.
Okay.
And It's really important to remember that, like the chapter points out, these aren't always problem behaviors. Sometimes they're just self-soothing or ways individuals explore sensations. That's a really good point. Not always something we need to change. All right, number 4.
Number 4 is to escape from attention or interactions. Now we're into negative reinforcement.
Okay, so removing something unpleasant.
Precisely. The behavior helps the person avoid or get away from a social situation or someone's attention that they find aversive or just uncomfortable. Maybe a student fakes being sick to avoid giving a class presentation.
Right, avoiding that unwanted attention. Okay, number 5.
Also, negative reinforcement, to escape from tasks.
This sounds familiar too.
Doesn't it? The behavior helps the person avoid doing something they find difficult, maybe boring, maybe just unpleasant. Like a student swiping all their materials off the desk when it's time for, say, a challenging math worksheet.
Yeah.
The chapter suggests this was probably a key function for Maurice's fighting getting kicked out of Mr. Harris's class meant escaping the demands of social studies.
So the suspension actually gave him what he wanted, in a way.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
It reinforced the fighting by allowing escape. Okay, and the final one, number 6.
To escape from internal pain or discomfort. This is automatic negative reinforcement.
Automatic again, so it's about alleviating something internal.
Exactly. Individuals, and this is often seen in those with limited ways to communicate, might engage in certain behaviors to reduce physical pain or some kind of internal discomfort they can't easily tell us about.
That makes sense. It's a way of coping when other ways aren't available.
Okay, so we have these 6 functions: attention, tangible, sensory, escape from attention, escape from task, and escape from internal discomfort. But how do we figure out which one is driving a specific behavior?
Great question. That's where the functional behavior assessment, the FBA, comes in.
Right.
The chapter really emphasizes that an FBA isn't just one thing. It's a systematic process to really understand the function. And once we have that understanding, then we can develop an effective behavior support plan, or BSP.
Okay, so FBA first, then DSP. What does that FBA process generally look like?
Well, it usually starts with someone, often a teacher or maybe a parent, identifying the problem behavior. And importantly, defining it clearly. Needs to be observable, measurable.
Okay, operational definition.
Exactly. Then a crucial step is screening. Are there any underlying medical issues, maybe sensory processing differences, or even learning difficulties that could be playing a role?
Good point. Rule those out first.
Then comes the main part of the FBA gathering information. We use different methods here, both indirect and direct. And sometimes, if needed, we might conduct what's called a functional analysis.
We'll get to that.
Right. All this information, all this data, then feeds into creating the behavior support plan and critically implementing it and then monitoring it, checking to see if it's actually working. It's an ongoing process.
Let's break down those information gathering methods. You mentioned indirect methods first. Informant assessments.
Yeah, basically getting info from people who know the individual well. Teachers, parents, caregivers, sometimes the individual themselves.
How do we do that?
A key tool is the behavioral interview. The goal is to get a really full picture. You ask questions like, what exactly does the behavior look like? How often does it happen? How long does it last? Where does it happen? Who's around? What happens right before it starts the antecedents? And what happens right after the consequences?
Lots of questions.
Definitely. Also asking about how the person usually communicates their needs. And crucially, what's been tried before and did it work?
Okay. What else besides interviews?
There are also behavior rating scales. You might have heard of things like the PBQ, MAS, FAST, QA, BF.
Seeing those acronyms.
They're basically questionnaires where informants rate how likely certain events or consequences seem to be related to the behavior. They can give us some quantitative clues, maybe point us towards a potential function.
There's always a but, isn't there?
Well, the chapter wisely cautions against relying only on these scales. People's memories and perceptions aren't always perfect, So they're useful, but usually not sufficient on their own.
Okay, so interviews and scales are indirect. What about direct observation? Descriptive assessment.
This is where we actually watch the behavior happening in its natural setting.
Eyes on.
Exactly. One way is using anecdotal reports. Just writing down detailed descriptions of everything observed before, during, and after the behavior occurs. Later, you analyze these notes looking for patterns. ABC patterns, antecedent behavior consequence.
ABC. Got it.
Another direct method is scatter plot analysis. This is really neat for seeing when behaviors are happening.
How does that work?
You use a grid, basically, marking off time intervals across the day or specific activities, and you just check if the behavior occurred during that interval. Over time, you might see clear patterns like, oh, it always happens right before lunch, or never during recess. It helps spot those time-related relationships.
Useful for identifying triggers may be tied to certain times or activities?
Definitely. And then there's the ABC descriptive analysis itself. This is more structured than an anecdotal report. You use a data sheet, and you record the specific antecedent, the target behavior, and the consequence every time it happens, right as it happens. The chapter gives a good example with Mona's hygiene routine.
Okay, so real-time ABC data.
Right. But again, a caution.
Mhm.
This shows us what things tend to happen together, correlation. It doesn't definitively prove cause and effect.
Correlation isn't causation. Heard that before.
Exactly. To get closer to understanding causation, sometimes we need that next level, functional analysis.
Okay, so what is functional analysis? Sounds more experimental.
It is. It involves systematically manipulating specific environmental variables, things we think might be controlling the behavior, to see what effect those changes actually have.
So you're testing hypotheses directly.
Pretty much. The chapter mentions common conditions used. For example, an attention condition where attention is given only when the behavior occurs, to test if attention is the function. A demand condition where tasks are presented, and the behavior results in a brief break, testing for escape from task. There are also conditions for tangibles, being alone, and a control condition, often called play.
Comparing behavior rates across these conditions tells you the function.
That's the idea. If the behavior happens way more often in the attention condition than others, it strongly suggests attention is the function.
Seems complex to set up, though.
It can be, but what's encouraging is that research shows teachers can be trained to do this effectively in classrooms. And there are also variations like brief functional analysis or BFA, designed to be more efficient, especially for school settings.
Good to know it's adaptable. Okay, so we've done our FBA, maybe even a functional analysis. We have a hypothesis about the function. What's next?
The Behavior Support Plan, the BSP. The chapter describes this as a formal written document. It pulls together everything from the FBA, the definition of the behavior, what was tried before, screening results, the FBA findings, our hypothesis about the function.
The why.
The why. And then, most importantly, it outlines the specific intervention strategies we're going to use.
What kinds of strategies go in the BSP?
Several key types. Critically, teaching alternative appropriate behaviors that serve the same function. If hitting gets attention, we teach raising a hand for attention.
Replacement behavior. Makes sense.
Absolutely essential. Then there are antecedent strategies, changing things before the behavior occurs to make it less likely. Maybe changing the task difficulty, providing choices, giving warnings before transitions.
Proactive stuff.
Exactly. And consequence strategies, how we respond. This includes reinforcing the replacement behavior consistently and usually minimizing or withholding reinforcement for the challenging behavior if safe and ethical to do so.
So reinforcing the good stuff, not the problem behavior.
That's the core idea. The BSP also needs to detail how we'll monitor progress, how we'll help the person generalize the new skills to other settings or people, and sometimes a plan for managing crises safely.
Sounds comprehensive.
It needs to be. And it should also include plans for staff training and ongoing support to ensure everyone implements it consistently.
The chapter also mentions positive behavior support, PBS. How does that fit in?
PBS is like a broader application of ABA principles. It's focused on building appropriate behaviors, but also on redesigning environments to support positive behavior and really enhancing overall quality of life.
If more systemic.
Yeah, often it uses that three-tiered model you hear about. Universal supports for everyone, targeted supports for groups at risk, and intensive individualized supports for those with significant needs.
And FBA fits in there.
Definitely. FBA is a cornerstone, especially at that tier 3. The intensive individual level within a PBS framework. You also see school-wide PBS, or SWPPS, which focuses on things like clear expectations for everyone, actively teaching those expectations, acknowledging positive behavior, using data for decisions system-wide. FBA informs the individual plans within that larger system.
So FBA is key, whether it's an individual case or part of a broader PBS system. Now, thinking about our listeners, the ABA professionals out there, this isn't always easy, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. Figuring out the function can be really challenging. Sometimes individuals have very limited ways to communicate their needs, or the situations are just incredibly complex with multiple factors interacting. Pinpointing the exact function takes careful work.
So what are the big takeaways for them from this chapter?
I think the number one message is always consider the why. Don't jump to an intervention just based on what the behavior looks like.
Function over form.
Function over form. Every time. Second, be systematic. Use those FBA methods, interviews, observations, maybe rating scales, perhaps functional analysis if needed to gather good data to inform your hypothesis. Don't just guess.
Data-driven decision.
Third, the power of teaching replacement behaviors. Find an appropriate skill that meets the same need, that serves the same function, and teach it and reinforce it consistently.
That seems crucial for lasting change.
It really is. And fourth, consistency and monitoring. A great BSP is useless if it's not implemented consistently by everyone involved. And you have to keep checking the data. Is it working? Do we need to adjust?
And maybe a fifth, collaboration.
Oh, absolutely. Good catch. Teamwork is vital, working closely with families, teachers, other professionals, and importantly, the individual themselves whenever possible. That collaboration gives you a much richer understanding and leads to plans that are more likely to stick and be effective.
So just to wrap things up a bit, we've really covered a lot of ground today, all centered on understanding why behavior happens.
Yeah, the importance of function, those 6 core functions: attention, tangible, sensory, escape from attention, escape from task, escape from internal states.
Right. And the whole process of figuring it out using FBA, the indirect methods, the direct observation like ABC, maybe functional analysis.
And then using that information to build a solid behavior support plan focused on teaching replacement skills and changing the environment. Plus, how this all connects to the broader ideas in positive behavior support.
Ultimately, it feels like focusing on the why isn't just about stopping a problem behavior in the short term.
Not at all. It's about teaching valuable new skills, creating real understanding, and ultimately fostering long-term positive change and improving the quality of life for the people we support.
So here's a final thought for you to take away. Think about a time when a strategy you tried, maybe one that seemed perfectly logical, just didn't produce the results you expected. Could understanding the hidden function, the unmet need behind the behavior, have changed the outcome?
It's a powerful question to ask. As you observe behaviors this week, challenge yourself. Look beyond just what you see on the surface. Ask yourself, what might this person be trying to communicate? What need are they trying to meet?
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today into such a critical aspect of applied behavior analysis.
It's always a pleasure to chat about this stuff.